Hi, so welcome to this catch-up. I've got a very special guest with me today.
Catch-up? No, it's a chinwag.
No, it's a catch-up.
No, it's a chinwag.
No, it's a catch-up. Yeah, I've got a very special guest with me today, so if you'd like to introduce yourself, special guest.
Special guest? It sounds like special agent, doesn't it? Special agent Mike Laverick coming at you through the airwaves.
Yeah, so this is kind of a bit of a special thing because we're not only are we doing a vCatchup, but we're also doing a
chinwag at the same time.
Yeah, so work that one out.
It's a mashup.
Well, I like what you were saying before. You know, I think you put in a Twitter to me before. What is it? The Wagman is vCatchup.
vCatchup, something like that. It flows off the tongue, obviously. This way of sort of mashing up words together.
I liked it.
I'm very. It's a really original idea that you've come up with. This vCatchup thing, where you every week you speak to some notable person in the. Yeah. Where did you get that idea from?
I don't know, mate. No. Look. I do want to say that this is a really important vCatchup to me. And like, look, before I've done, you know, I've talked to people like Stephen Herod and Bogomil Bagansky and Vaughan Stewart and all that. But like, for me, you know, a lot of this, you know, it was because of being, you know, talking to you, seeing you at a VMUG and, you know, getting to know you sort of thing that like this really came about, you know. So, you know, I kind of see you a bit of a mentor sort of thing, Mike. So, you know, firstly, I just want to thank you very much for letting me, you know,
just rain on the praise.
Take on, you know, take copy what you do, I guess, you know. Yeah. But look, imitation is the highest form of flattery. Yeah, so.
It's funny that you say that because occasionally, and this might be a bit of an ego trip, so apologies. Is I read some stuff on people's blogs and I look at it and I go, God, I could have written this. And then I think, well, maybe my style of what I was doing back with ESX2 or ESX3 has had a little bit of an influence in the way that people present and write their stuff. I told you it was an ego trip. But the same thing, but I think that's good. You know, what I really like about what you're doing and what I'm doing and what Lauren Mulholland is doing with Adapting IT is it's showing that anyone with entry-level equipment can, if they've got the time and the volition, put a show together which other people find valuable. And, you know, back in the day, you know, this was only accessible to big corporates who had loads of money and studios and all that kind of thing. Well, it's just like blogging, I guess. Video and audio now is accessible to anybody on the planet, and it's not an expensive thing to do. The only expenses are the time to arrange it. And of course, we do absolutely no preparation, so it doesn't require any time whatsoever. We just press the record button and we go. I
wrote some questions. Come on, I mean, that's kind of, I guess, where, you know, it is a bit different. Is I like to, you know, have a good set of questions, and what I've been doing, Mike, is actually having the same questions. It was really good at V-Forum because you actually got a feel for what was going on and what was on people's
different
mind
answers
at that
to the same question. That's an interesting approach. I mean, I've always done emails backwards and forwards, but usually what I've done with somebody like yourself is give the chinwaggy the agenda, because that immediately puts your guest comfortable because they're talking about something they're interested in, and then just see what goes from there. You know, what I always wanted to avoid with the chinwag and with the vendor wag when I was doing them was that kind of, well, gee, Mike, that's a really great question, and everybody knows how hokey these kind of corporate predefined, invigilated by marketing and PR people who don't know their shift key from their space bar. You know, whereas it's just a bunch of guys talking. You know.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, look, we're live at Melbourne VMUG at this point in time, and Mike's just delivered a wonderful keynote speech, Zero to Colo. Do you want to talk a little bit about that first? I don't know.
Well, do I have a whole hour?
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah,
I did overrun. I have a catastrophic problem as a presenter. I'm so used as an instructor to have 5 days to deliver content. When somebody gives you 45 minutes, I struggle. But in a nutshell, it's basically the history of my lab and how it developed, which I think actually is perhaps something I could trim down and cut. But it's more about how I reshaped vSphere to work with vCloud Director and some of the mistakes I made in building out my vCloud environment, and I'm just trying to pass on those experiences. Exactly what I did with ESX2 and Virtual Center.
That's right.
You know, how to do it, and by the way, here's something that can go horribly wrong, and the reason I found out is I did it, you know, hands up, being prepared to accept that you admit to that you don't do things perfectly all the time.
Well, you know, if we don't make mistakes, we don't learn anything, you know. So.
Well, the anecdote I once used to have about that is years and years ago I knew somebody who used to do the old service and support courses for Novell. And this was back in like the SCSI days. And of course the rule back then was all external SCSI devices should be terminated. Anyway, this particular individual got sent a Dell tape device to rig to their Novell box to do backups at the site we were at. And I stuck my head around the door and asked this person, you know, how are you getting on? And she said, I just can't make it work. And I said, of course, all external SCSI devices should be terminated. To which she did one of the early face palms, you know, oh my God. But it just goes to show you can tell people there's this problem. But until you experience it yourself and it gets burnt into your synapses, the next time you see the problem, you go, I've seen that before. And there's only one way to get that, and that's
learning.
Having the experience, you know.
That's a good point, yeah. Look, like I was saying before, I've got a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, and we kind of covered the first topic a little bit. The question was about, you know, what brings you here? Why are you attending the Melbourne VMUG this year? And, you know, what do you think of the user conference format? Yeah,
I do. I like the fact that we have these user conferences, and I like the fact that it's spreading its wings outside of the domain of the US. So the UK had its second user conference ever. It's a great way, I think, of bringing different VMUGs together. Certainly in the UK, because we're all quite clustered together, but we don't see each other that often. I guess it's different here, because here it's like a super duper Melbourne VMUG. Whether people travel that distance, I mean, obviously the sponsors do, and me and you do, but whether it pulls people together is different, because it's a different geography.
The distances make an impact, they do,
I like the fact that you've kind of done a very similar thing to what we did at the UK user conference last year, which is having a community track, which is kind of ring fencing and preserving the essence of what a user group should be about, and then not allowing it to be basically a junket for vendors to sell their wares, and that's an important, I think, for all VMUGs. Is you know, it's a necessary evil. You need the sponsors to cover the event and to cover the teas and coffees and whatever, and the internet access. But if the user group becomes just a creature of vendors selling their wares, we've kind of lost the point of what the user group is all about. And I think what you've done by having community sessions or the community track is the way to keep that. And I was saying to you just last night, you know, the user conference runs once a year. Don't forget, you've got 4 other meetings this year where it's the real essence of what a VMUG is about. Maybe 1 or even 2 vendor sessions, and the rest of the day is free for you to what to do. You know,
the difficulty here is bringing that community out. We're not as mature. You know, I look on Twitter, you know, what goes on at London VMUG, and you know, you guys have got it lucky because you've got a lot of independent people. You've got a lot of people who are active on Twitter, and here we're kind of still catching up with that. You know, I found when I went to VMworld last year for the first time, you know, the maturity of social media is just bang, everyone's out there and everyone's doing it sort of thing. Whereas here, we're kind of a couple of years behind, and so I've kind of tried to use that community sessions thing to really like try and get these people up front and centre and give them a face.
I wonder whether the reason that's happened is that each community is shaped by the local environment that it's in. So I don't think you should unfairly compare the UK to Australia or Australia to the US, because it's a different culture and it's a different layout.
You're right,
I mean, inside the London VMUG, you have about 10 or 15 V-experts, maybe even more. The last time we had a session was, who put your hand up your V-expert, and nearly half the room put their hands up. So it's a very small country, the UK. It's densely populated, and you know, City of London and the Square Mile is where some of the biggest corporate accounts are. So it's quite a unique little bubble, London. Outside of London, it's much less mature. The groups are much smaller. Some of them have only been started less than a year. So they're in the same position as some of the VMUGs elsewhere. But no, I think the social media side of things and the blogging side of things is obviously quite strong within that particular group. And there's a bigger contractor kind of culture, as we were saying.
Independent contractor thing.
And therefore contractors, they want to blog and have a high profile because that leads to engagements. But also they've got a lot of time outside of their contracts to do things like this.
Stop, start, isn't it? Kind of
I think it's harder when you're an employee. But on the subject of getting user sessions, the big thing that I think helped the London VMUG a few years to get more user content was saying to people, the slot time is half an hour. The first 5 or 10 minutes is you introducing yourself and what your subject is, and the last 5 or 10 minutes is you taking questions. Therefore, we only really want you to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. And I think that reduces the fear factor in somebody who's not used to presenting, getting them out there. And in fairness as well, as if they're not very good, you only have them on for half an hour. Whereas an hour slot is very intimidating, and if they're not an engaging presenter, it's like, oh God, you've got another 45 minutes of, I know I tried this, but it didn't work.
We've been trying to cut it down to 45 minutes for the session. So
you know, half an hour, but also trying to sell it to them as, look, we only really want you to speak for about 20 minutes tops.
It's a good strategy.
I think the other challenge that everybody faces, and London is no different, is people who attend the user group tend to be a bit passive and sit and watch, trying to get them engaged. And when you try and get them engaged, it's like, oh, well, my boss would never approve this. I'd never get approval. But we're not looking for people to reveal their IP addresses, domain names. We're looking for them to speak very generally about the problems that they've had and how they've resolved them, both from a business perspective, how did we get VDI off the ground, but also from a technical perspective. And, you know, let's face it, everybody has these problems. Let's all be honest and say that nothing gets rolled out.
Of course,
you know. And I think if you can't be honest about the challenges you face within a user group, where you've got trusted peers, where else can you admit to that?
There's nowhere else, is there really?
No.
Cool, that's good, So one of the other questions I had was just around, you know, like your commitment to your local VMUG. I mean, I guess like someone like yourself, your local VMUG spans many countries and many cities, but like, you know, obviously you're a big advocate of VMUG, but what kind of commitments do you make? You know, like what kind of stuff do you do?
Well, prior to coming on board with VMware, I would probably just go to the London VMUG as my regular gig, because it was the biggest, and I know a lot of the guys. Some of those guys have actually been students of mine in the past. And in fact, me and the chair of the London user group were on the same training course many years ago, which is how I got to know him. And I persuaded him to come along with the VMUG, and he ended up taking over the role of the chair. Now, with being on board with VMware, it's part of my role to actually go to VMUGs. When it comes to UK events, because you could just fill up your car with a tank of fuel and drive there, I could go to every UK-based VMUG if I wanted to. I had to be a little bit more careful with EMEA events and obviously coming out here. So the agreement I have with my boss is I do 2 VMUGs in elsewhere, and that it means I'm out there and being in touch with the community. But it's not like I'm doing a VMUG every week, because I've got my own stuff to do. I want to get in the lab and play around with stuff. I must admit, a lot of the stuff I've been doing is presentations like I did this morning, which I do enjoy doing. And it's good practice as well, getting up in front of a large audience. I would love to be able to do more education settings at a VMUG. I mean, I'm a former instructor. A 45-minute session doesn't really give me much chance to show off my technical knowledge. But the trouble I have found with it is, you could probably give me a room where I would do a whole day worth of training, but you'd end up cannibalising other parts of the VMUG if you're not careful.
We've kind of got that now with the VCDX bootcamp. There's some brilliant content in it, but it's 3 45-minute sessions, and I think it's a big investment for someone who's come. They've got the day off work, they've come to the event.
Well, one idea I had.
A lot of content.
I had when I was a VCI and I was still a certified instructor was, I was coming out to a VMUG, say the North Carolina VMUG, on a Thursday. Why not run a course that week? Where the course runs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday is the VMUG day. Friday is the end of the course, and you actually roll the VMUG into the course.
That's a really good idea, that is. Yeah.
And I thought of doing that as a way of making revenue when I was a freelancer, but also giving me a good reason to be in the US for a week. But it was quite a difficult thing to spin up. But maybe by working with a VMUG to say, look, I'm coming, I might as well do something here, and then trying to offer that training to VMUG members, especially people who are new. Because I don't want to teach people stuff they know already. But if we had the people who've just signed up for the VMUG, don't really know VMware, they're still putting their toes in it, offering them some sort of extended training at a nominal price or reduced price. But the logistics of trying to get that off the ground would be quite a challenge. But it's something that's there in the back of my mind, because I'm still a frustrated instructor, really. That's my problem,
Yeah, you'd like to get back into the whole 5-day course thing?
Well, I've been out of the instructing for about 2 or 3 years. I mean, the last course I taught was in 2009, and then very rapidly, and in a good way, I lost my VCI. I'm still a Microsoft certified instructor, even though I haven't taught a course since 2003. But if I wanted to do a Microsoft course, there's nothing stopping me doing it. The good thing about the VCI program is as soon as somebody gets dormant, you're out of the program. It stops people trading on credentials which they're not actually using anymore. But between you and me, maybe, I don't know, in 5 or 10 years' time, when I've done this for a while and I'm ready to do something else, maybe I'll go back to the instructing. I did really love it. And you do really know your stuff when you're an instructor, because if you have to teach vSphere, install and configure every week or every other week. After about 3 or 4 weeks, God, do you know it inside and out?
Well, you know, good example is Alistair Cook, you know. So, I mean, like, you know, if ever I've got a question, he's the guy I always ask, because he knows, you know.
You should always take the email address and Twitter ID of any instructor that you've got, because they're usually more than willing to help former students. And it keeps, the other thing is, when you get asked as an instructor a question you've never been asked before, you go, oh, I don't know. And then you go off and do some research.
And you find out,
And then the next week when somebody asks the question, you go, it's this. And everybody thinks, God, this guy knows everything. But what instructors learn from being with students is lots of different environments and lots of different questions. And you're sort of forged in the white heat of that barrage of questions every week, to the point that once you've been doing it for 6 or 7 months, you know your stuff.
Yeah, it's quite intensive, isn't it? You know, like,
definitely.
So look, a VChat wouldn't be complete without me mentioning the software-defined something. So
software-defined software.
Yeah. So like,
I've been joking. The hardware-defined data center.
So like, there was a lot of stuff about the software-defined data center being announced at VMworld last year and stuff like that. And I know this year, you know, I noticed recently that, you know, people like Brad Headland and Scott Lowe have all been taken on board by VMware to work on the software-defined networking. I'd really like to get your opinion on that, and like, you know, I think it's something, you know, even in the keynote today, Tim Hartman talked about it, you know, so it's obviously something that's front and centre for VMware at the moment. What insight can you give us on it? You know, what?
I've not touched Nicira at all, so I can't really give you much of a technical insight.
I'm more, you know, like what's going on in VMware.
Well, I've got some viewpoints on it, and I'll say that these are my own personal views. I'm not saying this is the VMware corporate line.
That's why you're here, Mike.
Because I think everybody, including yourself, are asking these questions, and as a community and as an industry, we will all be asking ourselves, what is the impact and significance of it? I want to be part of the debate. I don't want to be a broadcaster, says, you know. But the way I see it is that there's going to be lots of software-defined networking. I think I read on a blog a couple of weeks ago that somebody had identified at least 14 or 17 different flavours of software-defined networking, of which, for VMware, VLAN pools, which isn't really software-defined networking at all, but you could say a VLAN pool. You're spinning up new networks without having to do it on a tooling by tooling basis is one. Then you've got vCloud Director network isolation. That's a kind of networking layering, the MAC and MAC address encapsulation. Then you've got VXLAN. 16 million networks in a single, requires multicast, which always scares the bejesus out of people. And then we've got this Nicira thing that's, you know, is an acquisition. And that represents, what, 3 or 4 different ways of doing the networking out of these 14. So the way I'm looking at it is, where we are in software-defined networking is in a kind of evolutionary phase. Now, I know that phrase is loaded with loads of references, but I really mean evolution. I mean Darwinism. It's 14 species who are all going to fight to be, and which one will survive? It'll be the strongest and the fittest. It'll be the one that has either the best ecosystem surrounding it. It may not be technically the best way of doing it, but because it has enough support from the ecosystems and it's backed by Cisco, backed by VMware, maybe it will become the industry standard, or it will be because technically it is head and shoulders above everything else. And from a technical standpoint, the people who want the best of breeds will pick that over one that may not be best of breeds but best supported. So, I mean, already within VMware we're offering different types of software-defined networking. And I also feel that it will be, I look at what VXLAN, what VCDNI, I don't really know what the requirements are for Nicira just yet, what the requirements are, and some of those are asks of the physical network layer. So I can imagine many customers are going to look at the requirements and go, you know, this one here, it's not our ideal, but you know what, our network teams will approve it very easily. This one is our ideal, but our network teams are going to go, it's going to create a lot of politics. So we'll pick this particular form of software-defined networking because in our particular environment, it means we can take a right round our network team and go behind them. That's how I think it's going to shape out. So not looking for a one killer software-defined networking, but looking at the flavours of software-defined networking that your virtualization vendor offers you, who then gives you the choice to choose the one that suits you. What excites me about VXLAN is I think we're not far off network cards being VXLAN capable. switches being VXLAN capable, because you know this encapsulation that takes place, it's not without an overhead. And just like we've offloaded the overhead of copying a virtual machine or thin provisioning a virtual machine using Vi and VASA to the storage layer.
And back to the CPU, you know, like how you've embedded that into the hardware and not in the software.
Yeah, so we need those hooks into the network layer to make sure you can do all this layering without it impacting on performance. That's a third-party ecosphere play.
Completely,
so a lot of this software-defined networking isn't something that can stay within the boundaries of a particular ISV. It's got to be a industry-wide process. As for Nicira, this is something I will say about it, is I was speaking to a customer in Brussels a couple of months ago, a large financial institution, you know, and they were complaining about the number of VLANs they have and asking me, you know, what about this Nicira thing? And I said, you know, the acquisition only happened relatively recently.
Very recently,
you know, and even internally in VMware, the guys are working on how Nicira is going to be, because it was a thing in its own right. You know, how is that going to integrate within what we do already? Is it going to be something that can be had on its own? Because if you think about vShield, you can have vShield without having vCloud Director.
That's very true,
You don't necessarily have to buy vCloud Director to get vShield. You could have network layering without
network and security.
Yeah, without necessarily having vCloud. I mean, obviously the way it's packaged in the suite, a lot of customers are going to go for the whole top and tail, but there's nothing mandating that you must do that. You know, my interface to vShield isn't vShield, it's vCloud Director. So things go off on the vShield manager, I don't think about that. But if I actually go into the vShield manager, there's a lot of stuff that's a granular stuff that's not being exposed all the way up to the vCloud layer because I don't need to see it. So I think the Nicira thing is, you know, a work in progress. What I'm interested in, despite being an evangelist, is not like the big vision. I'm as interested in what we've got on the truck now. What can we do right now? Because the thing I want to avoid is what other vendors do, which is talk about the jam that's coming tomorrow. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps on this petty pace. Because you can always talk about features. What matters is the delivery of that. So I said to this customer, you know, Nicira, don't worry about that right now. You know, don't worry about that. Think about what your challenges are right now. What can you do right now with technology which is GA'd and fully supported and available? All things will come in time. You know, don't run too ahead of yourself. And the funny thing about that discussion, you know, we hate VLANs, we have too many of them, is every time I talked about there are opportunities. So, well, is it secure? What will our network guys say? VLAN, it's all about security, they say. No, VLAN isn't about security. It's never really been about security. And I said to this particular customer, do you remember in the days of early switch vendors that there was an exploit called VLAN flooding, where if you sent particular traffic types into the switch, all those walls of your VLAN just disappeared and you could see every single frame. It's only as that firmware, and guess what that is? Software got better. So I said, you know, VLANs are as soft as any VCDNI or as any VXLAN. It's just that the firmware got so good that it became as trusted as if it was an appliance.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Software-defined networking, software-defined storage has been with us all this time.
Oh yeah, well it's like cloud, isn't it? You know, like that. The whole outsourcing model and stuff has been there for ages, and as soon as we had a term for it, I've mentioned cloud at a vChat, as soon as someone put a name on it, everyone jumped on board and said, right, this is what we're doing. You know?
No, it's funny that you said that, because I said to my boss when I first came on board, the software-defined data center, which is our new message, is that partly because the term cloud has become so abused, misused, that it's become devalued as a currency a way of talking. And I said, well, where will we be in 2 or 3 years' time? Will software-defined whatever become as equally debased? And he said something very interesting to me, which was possibly, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. If VMware has coined this term and the industry jumps on this particular bandwagon, that is moving the industry on into the way we're thinking. But let me ask you a question.
Of course.
As this is a chinwag, and not just a vChat. What do you think about this software-defined networking? I mean, do you agree, disagree? What do you think about the?
I think.
What does Nicira mean to you?
I think it's really like it's seeing what's happened in the server industry and seeing how virtualizing servers has benefited organizations, that whole agility, that whole, I can provision a VM in a number of minutes instead of going through a manual process that could take 3 weeks. Seeing how that's changed organizations, and then the whole platform piece with high availability, baking it into the platform, SRM, baking it into the platform, not doing it on a per VM basis, that kind of stuff. It's kind of a similar cycle again, and I think it's like it's ding ding round one again, because the gloves are back on again, and it's like I'm going to have these fights with a whole different genre of people around, because networking hasn't changed a lot in 20 years, and so it reminds me, it harks back to being an evangelist inside of a company, 3-4 years ago, and saying, virtualization, we need to do this, we need to virtualize our servers, look at these benefits, but what about this, but what about that, we'll never use VLANs, we'll never use da-da-da, all that kind of stuff, and it harks back to that, and I think, as I say, we're all going to need to put our gloves back on a little bit and go back into that evangelist punching mode a bit and saying, well, these are the reasons why, these are the benefits, look, I'm sure it'll be easier this time because we've gone through the process once, but definitely, I wouldn't say there's a fight on, but there's an argument and a justification that needs to be made.
I think you've hit the nail right in the head. I've even said it's like I've just got into Doctor Who's TARDIS and gone back to 2003 and 2004, because the same arguments that were made against server virtualization and to a lesser degree desktop virtualization that I heard back in 2003, 2004, guess what? They're the same goddamn arguments that you hear about this cloud-stroke software-defined data center. I mean, back then all I wanted was a bit of VLAN tagging. Maybe a major ask would be 802.3 link aggregation, because I wanted to do load balancing. Ooh, voodoo technology, they would say. And the same with storage. I don't want 30 gig LUNs, thank you very much. I need at least anywhere between 300 to 500 gig LUNs.
That's a big
and you
one,
would see crazy things like people asking for 10, 35 gig LUNs so they could stick them all together in a VMFS extend and get the volume size they really wanted. But I think, in a way, it's the same, but it's different. It always is in our industry. There's nothing new under the sun, but every time something new,
isn't it? Like,
every time something new comes along, it's kind of very much like what we've done in the past. And what I've been saying to some people in the community is server virtualization, that Gen 1, if you like, last decade, that was easy. We had it easy. Because at least the person who introduced server virtualization owned that part of the stack. He owned the server. So previously you used to put Windows on the tin or Linux on the tin. Well, now you put ESX on the tin and you put VMs on it. Yes, there was touching of the storage and the networking that were asks. IOPS and disk IOPS were significant. But we weren't really asking too much of the network teams and the storage teams. Now we're asking for something that little bit more. I think probably the way forward is, rather than being us making an excess of them, is some restructuring of teams, such that I'm making requests of colleagues. Now, we've had that debate before. I was going to say,
that reminds me.
We had a chinwag a couple of months ago. The theme was infrastructure, the frustrations of infrastructure. And I was asking you about how you'd restructured the infrastructure to try and make that process better. I mean, what I found very interesting about that discussion was the decision to change the way the teams were structured was very much based around the introduction of
technology-led.
Technology-led. It was UCS. It was we're going to manage the blades, the networking, and the storage as a stack, rather than peeling them out and saying, once the packet has left the network interface of my server
over to this team,
we support that end to end. And so if you have a multidisciplinary team, you're not making a change management request to the network team and to the storage team. You're making a request amongst yourselves. I even have a feeling that, in some degree, the small to medium-sized business model, where everybody has to wear multiple hats because you don't have experts, might be the way corporate IT gets structured in the future, because it's quite expensive to have a bunch of people who only do storage, only do networking, only do servers. And yes, we do need specialists, but I think, to coin somebody else's phrase, we need T-style people. People who are very strong in a particular discipline, but people who are happy and interested in other layers. People who are only interested in doing one thing. People who are jack of all trades, they may not fit into this new model, but people who are a bit like you and me, curious people, interested in all different layers and how it all fits together, they're going to be the system integrators of the future, because you really need to know how all these pieces fit together.
They're all integrated, yeah. I think, it's interesting you say about the SMB thing, because that's kind of, I often when if I'm looking for a new opportunity or something, I'll look at my resume and or CV or whatever you want to call it, and I'll say, well, I haven't worked for any big banks, I haven't worked for these things. I've worked for a lot more smaller organisations, but what that's meant is that, like where I am now, I've done the networking, I've done the storage, I've done the server, I've done the design side of it, so it gives me really good grounding to say, yeah, I know how storage integrates with network, I know how network's dependent upon this component, and I think that broad skill set has actually paid dividends.
So, alongside this software-defined data center and basically allowing the system to do more automation for you, I think the future of this decade is more automation from an orchestration perspective and from a scripting perspective.
Puppet labs, that kind of stuff.
All of that is becoming really popular, and why? And this is something I said at the Silicon Valley VMUG last year. The history of virtualization so far is doing more with less. What do you think the rest of this decade is going to be about? Doing even more with even less. And if the number of VMs that people are creating is increasing exponentially, do you think the number of people hired to manage that growth is also going to grow exponentially? Or do you think management and us as corporate IT or even SMB IT, are we going to have to become more efficient, that one individual can manage more physical servers or manage more virtual servers than they ever do? Damn right it's going to be. I don't think you can achieve that just with orchestration and scripting on its own. The actual tools we use should have that automation built into them. And there's an awful lot of automation in vCloud Director that I see. It took me some time to set up the thing, but there's a lot of things I do now which I sit back and think, God, what would it be to do that if I had to do this all by hand? So even VLAN pools, for example, having to go into a switch and create a port group and put the VLAN ID on it, go down to the physical switch and make sure that VLAN is there. I don't have to do that anymore with vCloud Director. It does it for me.
You just set up a big list of them, and then it will go and consume them as required.
I create a new VApp which contains 10 or 20 VMs. I ask for a VApp network that automatically puts them behind a VLAN if I wanted to, automatically puts a firewall and NAT in front of them, and then I decide what ports are opened. Imagine having to do that by hand. One thing I've done recently, you talk about network teams. In my lab environment, which is at a colo, I have a Juniper firewall, which the colo provider said I had to have. Previously, it was up to me whether I had a firewall in the previous colo. That's how smart they were. But I don't know anything about Juniper, and I don't particularly want to learn anything about Juniper. It's not what I do. So what I've got them to do is take two of my internet-facing IP addresses, 81, 82, 83, 84. That's my external IP address. No, it isn't. And I've made them point that to the IP addresses of my edge gateways. So now the perimeter of my network is not the Juniper, it's an edge gateway. Now a lot of people said to me, ooh, that's dangerous.
That sounds good though.
Yeah, but behind that is another edge gateway where my view environment is. So I'm already in a DMZ style environment, purely in software. And the Juniper basically is any. What limits what packets come through is my configuration on the. You know what? That saved me already about £800 in having to raise a change request to the colo to get one of their guys to manage the Juniper for me.
Smart,
It's already saving me money, and it's within my domain. So I'm now doing firewall management as if like I used to on my router at home. A lot of people have a router at home and they open up some ports.
I do it every day.
VPN and RDP into their own stuff at home. I'm now doing it in the home lab. So that's a complete change, and that's all happened in 6 months for me. All new to me.
There's some really interesting points there, Mike. Look, we're about 33 minutes in. I usually go like 20, 25 minutes.
I normally go for about 50 minutes or an hour.
So should we meet in the middle somewhere? Have you got another question you want to ask or something? Because we've probably got another 5 or 10 minutes if you want to.
Well, okay.
I don't mind talking about.
You had a question for me which you haven't asked me, which is probably good because it's about futures. But I'll ask you because it's easier for you to talk about, which is what do you think this year or maybe next year is going to bring? What's your predictions for 2013 as we're still practically in the new year? It's still snowing in the UK, so it doesn't really
feel early days, isn't it? And I think we're about 38 degrees today in Melbourne. So
he's just rubbing it in.
That's why I get you out here, mate, so you can, appreciate
the sun.
I know you don't get much back at home,
I get sad. I get seasonal
adjustment
disorder, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But what do you think the future is going to bring?
Look, there's a lot of conversation about convergence. About hardware convergence. The old storage network compute convergence. I know there's a couple of really good products. I don't want to name names really, but there's I know Duncan Epping tweeted about, blogged about a few of them as well, and there's a really interesting market. Yeah, well, I don't, I could wear their shirt if if they want to help me out. But
sponsorship every time.
Yeah, but no, seriously though, those kind of companies, there's a lot of those emerging now. There's a big change in storage going on at the moment with flash. We're finally seeing those fruits around flash and hybrid storage. I look at the vendors that are sponsoring the event today, and there's a lot of small storage startups. A lot of people who come over from the US specifically to be here today. So I think that really gives us a good example of how the software-defined storage, the convergence of the storage, compute, and network technologies. I think that there's some really good products out there that are changing the way people look at how they build out the hardware in their environment. Particularly this idea that you just rack and stack. So I've got a.
But that's a very hardware centric sort. I mean, don't let me underestimate the flash, but more specifically, what are you hoping VMware will do this year? Or one question I've been asking some of the S&B podcasts, is there something that VMware could do for you today that would make your life easier in terms of the software and that we're producing? Is there something when you go into vSphere or into any of the other products, I really wish this was a feature of the product? Is there something...
Standardising on a single management interface would be good.
Yeah. So
I know we're in an interim right now, and that's cool.
You mean some of the products have different UIs?
Yeah. It was really good how a lot of the third parties started building plugins for vSphere client, and now we've got the vSphere web client, and so that obviously we're in a transition phase at the moment. So I think my bugbear is I use SRM, and so I've got to have two management interfaces because SRM's only on vSphere client; it's not on the web client. And then I'm trying to sell potentially vSphere replication internally, so it means then that I'm going to have two management products to actually manage that combination. And that's an interim thing. I know it's going to change, but that's kind of where I am right now.
I mean, I haven't really played around with the new editions of that. Is it still can you manage vSphere replication from the C# client?
No. Not that I'm aware of right now, yeah.
Because you could in 5.0, you would get a plug-in and, you'd enable... The appliance would be imported into vSphere, and you'd get the radio button to choose vSphere replication rather than using array-based replication.
I'm doing a design for my customer now, and for that, I've implicitly have to say, look, you're going to have to use this tool for this, and you're going to have to use this tool for this because they're not mutually exclusive.
So, is it what you're really looking for? A single pane of glass?
Oh, where's the bullshit button? Oh, can't say that. Sorry. Where's the button, mate? I was hoping you were going to bring the button.
I should have brought it with me. I got this Staples bullshit button from a mate of mine, Charlie Gautreau, who's the VMUG leader for the Charlotte VMUG, and I stuck it in my rucksack, and it was a very stuffed rucksack. So as I went through American security, it would go, that ain't horseshit, man, bullshit, really loudly.
Funny looks,
not in front of security. But I take your point. I mean, you could extend that a little bit further. The vCloud Director UI is substantially different in look and feel to the web client, isn't it? And which in turn is different from the vSphere client.
Yeah, and the V client. Well, my other thing, you talk about vCloud. Look, vCloud Director for me, that's something. From being a VMUG leader, I see a lot of people talking about vSphere and talking about vCenter, and I think that's kind of the next big thing that you guys, and I guess that's why VMware took you on as evangelist for vCloud Director, is that there's an education piece, and your the great work that you've been doing around your blog post and talking about your journey to vCloud, it's really opened my eyes on a lot of things that vCloud can do. And I know you had a chinwag with Ed
Grigson,
a couple of weeks back. Oh no, we've got a continuity error now. Never mind. But and he talked about using vCloud for test and dev, and I think that's kind of a really good piece that you've got there. Is around when I did vSphere, when we did vCenter originally, it was all about, let's put it in test and dev, let's understand what it is, let's put it there, and then using that as a vehicle, once the confidence there, to put it in production. But for me, I'll finish now, for me, it's really about understanding more about what vCloud value is, vCloud Director's value is. We talk about multi-tenancy, but that doesn't mean nothing to where I work. You know, there's only one organisation.
So there is only one tenant.
But if I can use that multi-tenancy to separate test from dev from prod, I think, bang, I'm onto a winner. Because for me, internally right now, operationally, it's around having that effort to spin up a test environment. And, you know, Ed talked about it quite a lot. You know, all the numbers that we've got, all the ducks that we've got to line up to get this test environment that's relative to the production environment, but keeping it real, keeping it current, you know, and then spinning off duplications of components of that test environment into a dev environment. Man, if you could do all that for me, and I believe vCloud's got some value there in doing that. If you can do all that for me, that would change a lot of what I do operationally.
Sure. I mean, a couple of things I would say about that is I thought it was interesting that Ed made that usage case of test and dev for vCloud, because I think I might have said on the podcast or afterwards, most of the people who are actually using vCloud Director are actually using it in test and dev environments. Now that's a little bit because of the end of life of Lab Manager, and it's a little bit because of the thing you said, that people are a bit reluctant to put production workloads in vCloud. The thing I think which is often sort of misunderstood is your production VM in vCloud is still executing on the vSphere layer, on the ESX host that you trust for your production VMs. vCloud isn't in charge of the process management of that VM, it's trying to do some orchestration. So, I mean, if vCloud Director is dead to the world, your VM keeps on running. It's a bit like, you know, like DRS or something like that. You know, if a host fails, you get a restart of the VM, and you know, if Virtual Center is down, it doesn't mean your web tier is down. You know, you've just lost a management layer. We all know how important that is now with all the other orchestration we're doing.
So you can take a good vSphere, vCenter implementation right now and overlay vCloud onto it straight away, sort of thing. Yeah? I mentioned the word good. You know,
I think you should consider that. I think there are some challenges still about sucking up from the vSphere layer into vCloud Director. I mean, for example, if you literally took an existing cluster and put vCloud Director on top of it and logged into vCloud Director, you wouldn't see any of your existing VMs, because that's part of the point. It's introducing new abstraction layer. What you're then looking at is using something like vCloud Connector or perhaps OVF exports to take the VMs that you really want to live and be managed within the domain of vCloud Director into there. I think there are still some challenges about achieving that. I think some people, when they look at that, start to think, well, should we actually have a spun-off instance of vCloud Director on new kit, and then start to see the old vSphere layer we had as something that we gradually depreciate and slowly migrate to. The one thing I would say about the whole test and dev argument, though, and I know why it's sad, I appreciate it, you know, a low-hanging fruit, yada yada, because there's low risk involved. But the trouble with taking a low-risk approach is that then there's low benefits associated with it as well. I think one of the things that stymied the growth in virtualization in the early years was a certain congenital knee-jerk conservatism about anything that's new. So we'll run this in our test and dev environment first and kick the tires. This is good for our DR environment. We'll run this in our branch offices. But our production environment, we're going to wait and wait and wait. Now, I understand in a corporate environment, people want a low-risk, low-barrier entry into a product. But as soon as you take that particular attitude, you always push into the long grass the real business commercial benefits. Because unless you're a design house, or unless you're a company like an online gambling company that's constantly producing new applications and new versions and new bits of software, if your environment is relatively static, that kind of flexibility and fluidity doesn't really offer you the same benefits if you refuse to put a production workload into it.
But what about, though, if you were with the test and dev stuff? What if you could prove doing that test and dev that you've actually improved the productivity, you've improved, and I'm really purposefully taking the people slant and not necessarily the technology slant, because if you like something like vCloud Director, you can basically change how your organization functions on an IT level. If you can show that and demonstrate that, doesn't that then, at the end of the day, ka-ching, it's less dollars, it's less less time and effort that we're doing on, break fix and those sort of things, and looking more at, well, what are the new applications coming through? Let's look at the application stack. Let's look at the, like if you're getting that sell internally, surely then your organisation is going to turn around and go, do you know what? We need to embrace this. We need to go further. Yeah?
Well, I mean, I used to get people saying this in the early VMware courses in 2003, 2004. Mike, virtualization will be test and dev only. This will never make it to production. And I used to say to you, I used to say to the students, I think you're wrong. I think you're dead wrong. You will love virtualization so much in your test and dev that it is inevitable. It's a force of nature that people want to do in production. The idea of going back to physicalization is an anathema. And I used to say to some of the students, towards the end of my training career, I have not installed Windows to a physical box in 7 years. And they'd look at me in kind of
that's great,
horror.
Yeah, that's a great
but I thought, this is brilliant, because I'm so immersed in this world. The idea that once a customer gave me a HP Smart Start CD to install Windows to a physical box, and I just pretended that I didn't know what it was. So you want me to put Windows on the physical machine,
like sending a fax, eh?
So the same with the fax. So you want me to put this piece of paper through this box, and the paper arrives on. What will they think of next? Is this called physicalization? Is this a new thing that's going to? But I take your point. I think the other advantage of what you're saying is, it's a place for us, the people who have to support this, to learn on. So if you're supporting vCloud Director in a test and dev environment, and you come across something that doesn't work for you, or something that you haven't designed correctly, or even a bug, let's just face it, it means that when you come to do that in production, you've been through the wheel already. And if you see that bug or error, you've been wrought in the white heat of supporting in test and dev. That value I see.
You've earned your stripes.
You've earned your stripes. And I think it's not just proving to the business that it's worthwhile, it's giving you the reassurance and confidence. And it starts with the home lab. It starts with you playing around with the software and saying we should use this in our test and dev, and then it goes from test and dev in production. So in a weird way, I think in the VMware community, the test and dev, the home lab, is the proof of concept that no business actually sees. And we come to the business and say, shouldn't we be doing this? Here's my last thought on it. It's about change. And I came out with this phrase just before the London VMUG.
Is it a tabloid headline?
It's a tabloid headline.
I love them.
And the phrase is, all change is disruptive. And if it isn't disruptive, it isn't change. So by definition, anything that's new, if it isn't upsetting things, then it isn't change. So I used to think what I did was manage and introduce change. I don't think that anymore. What I now do is disrupt things. So that means you have to be the person who comes in and says, we should be doing this. And you should expect people to go, we're not happy about this, we're not interested about it. The skill comes in handling that disruption and trying to convince your peers in the business that that disruption will actually have benefits at the other end. So rather than being agents of change, which was a buzzword,
I was going to say that.
Change artists, I think HP used to say. I'm an agent of disruption.
That sounds much better, yeah. Sounds much cooler, yeah.
It sounds much like kind of, I'm coming in and ripping around.
Evil laugh.
Evil laugh. So, but it's funny because a number of times people say, oh, it's very disruptive, that. And I go, yes, it's called change. Welcome to it. If it isn't disruptive, then you're not changing anything. What you're voting for is status quo. For steady as she goes, we'll keep things ever going. But in the context of vCloud Director, I think a lot of people said, oh, it's a difficult product to sell this. And I've said to people, all of these products that sit on top core virtualization are difficult to sell because the real value, immediate value, is in virtualization. Not everyone is going to be beneficial from virtual desktops. Not everyone is going to want SRM. Not everyone is going to want V. So they're products that are harder to sell and promote and get the companies to adopt because you really need a very good usage case for it to happen. Unlike virtualization, which is such a no-brainer, anybody not doing it really seriously needs their head examining. Whereas the other technologies and automation tools that sit on top, they're harder to sell because you have to be somewhere. I mean, for example, SRM, in a test and dev, low-hanging fruit environment, why do you need a DR plan for something that isn't business critical? It's only now we're seeing people put tier 1 line of business applications in virtual, which if they don't work or are not available, there's a serious issue that it focuses the mind, it rarefies, it purifies. And people say we really need to think about protecting this stuff now. That's something that VMware can't engineer. It's down to customers being on the journey and being at a certain point in that journey where they go, you know what, we're really ready for something like vCloud Director, or we're really ready for something like virtual desktops, for example. And so different customers have different priorities based on what they're trying to achieve, you know. For a customer base that has everybody on one site, you know, with no roaming users, virtual desktops is quite a difficult environment. Roaming users all over the place, there's loads of branch offices. Now then becomes a much
no-brainer.
It's not like VMware has any control over that usage case. The customer has to bring it to us, and then we have to try and think, well, we think this particular offering suits you. And that's why I think it's a harder process. It's not just more political. The immediate benefits aren't as realisable as they are with core virtualization. We're running out of battery. It's time to wrap up the show.
I think, that's a good thing, So, look, Mike, thank you very much. I'm honoured to have you on a vChat, and I'm honoured that you associate with the Chinwag as well. I really am. So, thanks for...
We need our 2 brand names in the logo.
Thanks for everything you do. Keep doing it. Don't stop. I was really concerned about you joining VMware. I thought, what's going to happen to Mike Laverick? But do you know what? You must woke up one morning and you've gained a year or whatever, and that's all that's changed, nothing else. So
it was kind of funny actually when I joined it. I went from tiptoeing down to my home office on the Friday to tiptoeing down to my home office on the Monday. Nothing really felt like it changed. I always wanted one more change, so I could really see that there was a difference between one era and another. I guess it'll be different once I have to start turning up in an office as opposed to sort of working from home. But I don't know how long that's going to be. But I mean, I want to carry on doing the things I've always done, and I think I'm meant to be the kind of linchpin into the community, and trying to inspire people to do things. And I've got a ready-made audience of people who know me through RTFM education and the books and things like that. So for me, it's just extending on stuff I've done before. And now I'm on the inside of the house. What I'm trying to do is identify resources that we have and say, well, can we not share these? If we take out some of the stuff that's IP based or maybe competitive based, there's a lot of resources internally inside VMware which I feel could be shared, and I'm trying to be the funnel for getting that out. But don't worry, I'll be okay. You look after me. Don't worry about that.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you. Thanks, mate. Thanks,
Bye bye.